The late Judge Robert Bork wrote a controversial book in 1996 called Slouching Toward Gommorah: Modern Liberalism and American Decline. He was pilloried in the mainstream media for being a negative, conservative alarmist. As an aside for you younger people, or if you have forgotten, Judge Bork's name entered the popular lexicon of the time. Borking is a term loosely defined as the personal vilification of a nominee for a position by means of unsubstantiated allegations, as conservative Judge Bork's 1987 Supreme Court confirmation hearings were driven off the rails by leftist Democrats. When Obama next complains that his nominees are given a hard time, go back and search out what his ideological brethren did to Robert Bork. But back to 1996. That was the year former Reagan cabinet member Dr. William Bennett published his The Book of Virtues. In it, he attempted to call our attention to a process he termed the coarsening of the culture. He was likewise raked over the coals for attempting to point out what, in retrospect, anyone with half a brain would recognize as early attempts to prevent the slide that has brought us to this sad and lamentable place where we now find the former shining city on a hill. Some of you older folks may recall that in 2003, Dr. Bennett admitted to having a gambling addiction during a period around the publication of his book. He was again publicly castigated for his transgression. That would have also been around the time when Bill Clinton was being felated in the Oval Office by one of his young subordinates, one Miss Lewinsky. DNA testing of some spots on one of Miss Lewinsky's dresses proved to be of Clintonian origin. During Clinton's ensuing impeachment, which most of the media called various names synonymous with frivolous, he vehemently denied his transgressions and does so even today. As much as they tried, the leftist media could not completely ignore a congressional impeachment proceeding. But they did all they could to downplay the seriousness and the impact of it on Clinton's presidency. It came out later that the Israelis had Osama bin Laden in their sights 3 different times, and preoccupied with covering his tracks in l'affaire Lewinsky, Clinton declined to take action. One can only guess how his failure to act might have impacted the events of 9/11/2001. It's entirely possible that 9/11 might not have happened and over 3,000 Americans might not have perished that day. And speaking of the Clintons, during the Watergate investigation, Hillary was fired from a congressional committee because she was a dishonest, unethical attorney. Those are the words of her boss at the time, and it is clear that she hasn't changed. She has always been an aggressive, calculating, hateful, manipulative revolutionary who will do anything to advance her agenda. She still lies, schemes, violates the Constitution, and is entirely untrustworthy. And if someone is killed in the process, quote, what difference does it make? Close quote. And Hillary's legendary foul mouth, while First Lady of Arkansas in the United States, has been chronicled by half a dozen authors. But her scatological and profane outbursts, generally aimed at Willie and her lowly Secret Service and military servants, were largely confined to private settings. One can only imagine what spewed from this woman's mouth as 4 abandoned Americans died that night in Benghazi. I really relish the prospect of her becoming president. Her press conferences and negotiations with foreign leaders should be far more colorful than those of previous presidents. The differences in treatment by the mainstream media? I don't recall that Dr. Bennett was ever accused of being felated by subordinate females in his office, but was set upon by the media for his admitted sin of gambling. Bill Clinton was given a pass by this same media, setting the stage for their worshipful, genuflecting coverage, or is that covering up, of Obama and his ongoing criminal enterprise. Forgive the foregoing digressions. I inserted them in an effort to head off the inevitable beatdown and cries of hypocrisy coming this way from the leftists who might stumble across my rant. Let me cut to the chase. Nearly all of the virtues we may have possessed in 1996 are now but a distant memory for a disturbing number of those around us. The most cursory trip into the internet will reveal that. You only need to read some of the stories coming out of the Obama administration. Benghazi, IRS harassment of opponents, generally Democrat vote buying and outright fraud, the failure to hold accountable those around him who are either incompetent or, as in the case of Obamacare, following his deceitful orders to create a base for the single-payer system he and they wanted all along. Of course, politicians of all stripes have lied for eons. Obama and his mendacious minions have honed it into an art form. I refuse to watch the so-called State of the Union Fib Fest, but I do hope some of you kept a tally of the chief pontificator's prevarications. I suspect the list consumes several large tablets. I could go on, but space and the TV-induced 90-second attention span of the average American is limited. Which brings me to TV, and a phenomenon to which Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan introduced us in his book, The Medium is the Message. If the coarsening of the culture was moving along briskly in 1996, today it is hypersonic. We plop down to watch a TV football game only to find Janet Jackson having a wardrobe malfunction, an androgynous, nearly nude Miley Cyrus twerking with some jerk in prison stripes and stroking herself in private places once reserved for the bedroom. The Grammy Awards, so slanted to the left-wing, liberal, libertine, and homosexual agendas that Natalie Grant and several other Christian performers left the building in protest. Trust me when I tell you there will be many more. We're getting the message all right, the progressive message. While early American presidents have come close, we're heading straight into uncharted waters. But other nations have led the way. Greece, Rome, the Weimar era in Germany, Sodom, and of course, Gomorrah. I'm afraid I have no choice but to end this with some bad news. We're no longer slouching toward Gomorrah. We've arrived. But the really bad news is that if this train continues to move, our ultimate destination will make Stalin's Russia and Hitler's Germany look like veritable paradises. Oh yes, lest you go away from this with the impression that you've just heard a rant from another holier-than-thou hypocrite, know that, in the eyes of God, like all of you, I am just another failed, fallen sinner and a work in progress. Thanks for listening.